Justin, you beat me to video.
I was going to get in and defend myself about being very red ahead of any jokes you could get out there, but we'll see how it plays out.
This is actually going to be a webinar about how red Justin's face is, and that's that's really it. Actually, I'll get it started. My name is Jason Lang. I'm the practice lead of Target Operations team. Joining me is the esteemed, the inimitable Justin Elze. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Justin Elze, I'm CTO at Trusted Sec. I'm over a couple fun things like IR and research, work with Jason all the time. So um, we wanted to take a run at probably some of the most common client questions we get up front, with scoping red teams, things we've learned along the way, just some general feedback on how to make, them successful.
Whole point's really to see if we can break down, or at least distill down, top 5 ways to maximize value. And like Justin said, that's going to include things like, proper scoping and stuff like that, as well as top 5 ways that we see engagements get devalued. And I think it's important to cover both because having done this, for quite some time and, read a lot of reports, interacted with tons and tons of clients, as well as internal red teams, there's definitely good ways of doing things and ways that can harm things. And I'm kind of like I said, devalue. And that's why we named the title of this, don't burn your money, because there are some times when we're working on red team engagements and like, the chat happens and we're just like, I know what's happening here. We could go a better way about this. Now, at the same point in time, we trust our clients to know, exactly what they need to know. But at the same point in time, we're also being paid to be, uh, a trusted counselor, so to speak, to help people on their journey to improve their security posture. So we'll start out with the 5 ways to maximize value, and then move into 5 ways that we see value decreased. And by the way, we are paying attention to the Q&A. So by all means, drop in as many questions as you want. If we go into a topic, we just glance over something and you want more, or even stories to back it up or things like that, by all means, just throw a question there. We're happy to get into more nitty gritty details. But let's talk about top 5 ways to maximize value. And when we wrote these, it's really in no particular order, so they're not prioritized really in any important way. Just these are things that came to mind as we were discussing this. And I'll take one, we'll open it up to Justin, and he'll take another one, open back to me, and let's get the conversation going. So, and again, questions, by all means, throw them out there. Number one is, actually, yeah, I'll just say this. Number one is inform the right people that a test is occurring. And you're going to notice a pattern when it comes to these, which is that for every positive way, there's kind of an opposite, like the other side of the coin. So like I could say that one of the ways that you devalue test is not informing the right people, but we have a separate list of that. But so inform the right people. And what do I mean by that? So when getting into the room or kickoff call for the first time with clients or things like that, sometimes they're like the very best tests are the ones where enough people are informed that even if there's a clandestine element to the test where we don't want to get caught right away, the people that need to know are in the room. And so, for example, I'm putting more meat on the bone, so to speak. One person that I always recommend is in the room is the SOC manager. And that might go against the grain of, other red team philosophies where it's like, no, we're going to keep everyone in the dark. And this, like, frequently this happens. Like if I get an internal auditor that's on the kickoff call, that's how I know they're like, nope, nobody's going to know. We don't want to tell anyone. And then once you get caught, then we'll do the big reveal. And I'm like, are you sure you want to do that? Because typically involving the SOC manager, I understand not involving the SOC. That makes perfect sense. You want the SOC to follow the IR process, right, during a red team, which is great. That makes sense. But at least tell the SOC manager. That way the SOC manager's not caught off guard. You're not burning bridges. And they don't get really upset. Like if they find out the hard way that this is, really just an exercise and people are awake at 2 in the morning, and et cetera, et cetera. Informing the right people out of the gate is really, really helpful. And so we put together what we call the need to know team, the SOC manager, someone in upper management, whether that's a C-level or, the CISO or a security director or things like that. The main point of contact, whoever that's going to be. Sometimes that's an internal red team manager. Sometimes that's an internal auditor. That's fine. And then just making sure those people are in the know. and brought into the fold, read into the engagement. That's important and really goes a long way, because think about it this way. If we're doing something and then let's say there's a detection, all right, we're in the active testing, there's a detection. SOC manager gets a hold of it, starts watching the process, watching how their team is interacting. And then all of a sudden, the team says, hey, we want to take destructive action. And what this actually kind of getting the second point, but we want to take destructive action. We want to start rebooting systems. The SOC manager can be like, whoa, that's fine. Hold on. This is actually a test. Good job, everyone. But the SOC manager doesn't have to start making frantic phone calls at 3 a.m. because they don't know what's going on. So that's a good one, is involve the right people that tests occur. And Justin, you got more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, if you would have asked us 5, 6, 7 years ago, we may have taken a different approach with some of this, about maybe keeping some people out of it. I think the days of people gaming pen tests and red teaming, trying to win is fewer and far between. It's more people are working towards the same goal. A SOC manager realizes that if something happens on his team, it's a training opportunity, but usually it's something to do with budgeting or staffing or other concerns like that. So it's not so much, hey, we're trying to see you trip and fall. It's, we're doing this. So I think, years ago, you'd see a lot of people saying, like, keep everyone in the know because somebody's going to cheat or you're not going to get as authentic of level of results. And I think that's largely changed because people realize that, playing along with this and seeing where things go will generally lead to positive outcomes for you and your team, even if a mistake happens or something along the way.
Definitely.
All right, I'll jump into the next one, which is sort of linked to this one. A plan for detection and deconfliction. So one of the big things here is, all clients are kind of in a different space about why they're doing a red team, what they're trying to get out of it. We have clients that will do everything from, if you guys get caught, we'll perform a complete eviction. Like, we'll run our full IR process. We will take everything down. We'll image systems. We'll pull, maybe even pull an outside IR, all of those things. And that's fine. That's what you're trying to test. We have other clients that, hey, if you get caught along the way, we'll start roping people in and let them know you're testing, but we want to continue on because the goal is to go over here. We'll partially run our playbook to a certain extent, maybe start you over from a different system. So everybody's in a unique spot. And we always lead into these with, like, what are you trying to learn? What are you trying to get out of this? And we kind of frame those pieces around that. It's the same kind of piece around deconfliction. So we'll always maintain some kind of out-of-band communication channel, Signal, Slack, Teams, whatever the client's comfortable with. That way, if something pops up, say the SOC manager pops in and says, hey, it's Friday at 9 o'clock at night, is this domain you all, is this IP you guys, this activity, we can do deconfliction in real time. There's in the past, people kind of did this over email, and there was always a delay there. So there's a much higher comfort level of doing back and forth on the chat piece. And that's a big thing to plan for. Then the kind of the same thing around detection, deconfliction with, when are we going to do something like quarantine a domain controller? Because those things happen, and that might not be the outcome you want.
It's similar to my answer. I agree on all points. When having kickoff calls with clients, and this is actually really good for internal red teams as well. This isn't just like, consultant only domain. But for doing kickoff calls, I tell clients when we come up with a plan for deconfliction, I tell them that let the IR process play out naturally, or organically. That's one of the biggest values of a red team, as opposed to, say a pen test, is that we're actively engaged in the defense. We want to see what they do. We want to test their capabilities. We want to see how well they follow their process, particularly the people. And that's important because a lot of times, it's most tests, most red teams that I'm on, where a detection will get sent up the chain and then it's closed as a false positive. And so we want to test that. Those are really good learning opportunities. But I typically tell the SOC and my point of contact, I'm like, listen, there are really 3 points when it's time to like get into a reveal. If the SOC, and this goes into the third point actually, so I'm going to put the two together. The third point, so the first point, inform the right people. Second point, plan for detection, deconfliction. Third point, schedule the reveal. And I'm gonna put these two together. So if the SOC wants to cause an outage via, say, rebooting systems, if they want to take destructive action, in other words, reimaging. On my last engagement, the SOC wanted to start reimaging the SCCM environment for Who knows why? Unknown reasons, right? Or the third is they want to start like waking up the sea level. They want to start involving lawyers, and they're like, we're getting hacked. So any one of those three things, they want to cause an outage, they want to take destructive action, or they want to start, waking up the sea level in the middle of the night. That's when it's like, okay, everybody, stand on the lasers. This is just a test. Good job, because that if we're at that point, that obviously means there's an ongoing active investigation, which is good. That's what we want to see. And then my job as the tester is to fill in the gaps in the kill chain and say, okay, you saw me right here, but you didn't see me here, here, and here. And then we start working with the defense. So this is such a huge value add, I think. And I'm not sure how many orgs do this. If you're listening and you're a professional red teamer, you should be doing this. This is where I see some of the biggest benefit of customers across verticals is when you actually involve the defense at some point. So let's say that you got a test. Let's say that test is 6 weeks long, okay, or it's 8 weeks long. All right, and you should be scheduling a reveal. So if the client wants you to run in a clandestine mode, fine, great, do it. Run in clandestine as much as you can. If you get internal access without things like an assumed breach, it's great. Keep running with that. But at some point, I would say no more than 3/4 of the way through the test, there should be a reveal. And the reveal should involve the defense. And what does that do? That gives them a couple of weeks at least to schedule calls with the tester, get into a Slack room, get into a Signal room, let them ask all the questions that they have. Hey, we took apart this payload and we saw X, Y, and Z, but what else is it doing? Or we saw you here, but not here. What are we missing? That is so beneficial. That's so beneficial. As opposed to you run the entire test clandestine, you don't get caught, you ship them a PDF at the end, and they're like, hey, that's great, we got a bunch of findings, and they file it under the pen test realm, which is, you're just missing value at that point. And so even internal red teams, guys, please be doing this. Be sure to don't just work with the defense long after it. If you're a consultant, don't just work with the defense like during a debrief call. Actually take some of the scheduled engagement time and take as many meetings as they need, because that's what this is really about. It's not just about, laying waste and collecting all the hashes. That is fun, but that's not what it's about. It is truly about training the defense and improving them. So allow them to ask questions of you, any questions that they have, all good things. That is really, honestly, that has become my favorite part of a red team. I love the hacks, I love the shells, but I love watching the light bulb go on for defenders when they actually see the flow all the way through the kill chain. It's a great moment. Elze, any comment on that?
I say it's not uncommon to get to the end of something like this, and be undetected the whole way. But again, like to Jason's point, if we say, you know what, we guys should pick a time, maybe the last week, the last 3 or 4 days to bring that team in, because those things are fresh in mind. Maybe they caught a payload and they triaged it and marked it as, benign, or maybe they caught a backdoor and they didn't, fully flush out their process. Like, it's great if you talk about those things, 3-4 weeks later, but when it's top of mind for them, they can do some back and forth, and they're still, they like to collaborate. So, while we talk about a lot about what to do if, you detect us along the way, it's still, we can still get through an entire red team without any major detections or anything that impacts us along the way. So, the sooner you can evolve those teams and let them ask questions, the better. That's a good thing for the SOC manager too, because I've seen them ask questions along the way and take notes. They're not going to key their team in, but at least they're getting back and forth from us so they can bring those key points up later. I'll jump to the next one. So I like Jason had this as microwave when needed, which I kind of was entertaining. So the thing is, clients get more secure every year and spend more money every year. There are certain areas where you might want to jumpstart something. So, assume breach in a certain area or help do initial access in a certain area. We've seen the model kind of shift. So historically the model was, OSINT, external testing, credential spraying, web apps, things like that. More often than not, phishing, getting in and kind of continuing on. Because people spend so much money on EDR, hardening, all those things, phishing, social engineering could take a lot of time. So we've seen companies worry about specific focus areas, either drop us into an assumed breach or, kind of give us some insight about what to go after in a more granular fashion than just, hey, get to PHI, get to mergers and acquisitions data, steal a code name project. There's definitely more back and forth than there's ever been before, just because people are trying to get the best return on money. Like at the end of the day, you're buying a block of time. And I think that people are definitely more cognizant of that than ever. While we certainly have clients that do the full outside in, there's a lot more of, hey, we saw this threat actor doing cloud activity, or this threat actor doing DMZ appliance compromise. Let's put you somewhere over here. We'll get that going and kind of let you see what happens, because it's a more unique scenario for SOC staff, detection engineers, things like that. Jason?
Yeah, and it was a client that actually heard for the first time use the term microwave, and I latched onto it because like Justin said, if you have a fixed amount of time in dollars, at some point, some corners need to be cut. Really just to give you a holistic experience. But I would say I can think of 2, maybe 3 clients off the top of my head where they're just like, nope, we're not going to assume breach. You're just going to fish and fish and fish until you can't fish anymore, and that's it. If you don't get in, you don't get in. And what's interesting is that those clients are very, very happy with getting back a report that's got like 10 campaigns in it. SMS and voice and various kinds of social engineering. And some might be successful, some might not be successful, and they love it. That's exactly what they want. The rest of the clients typically want to see internal attack paths at some point. And so, like Justin said, with phishing and social engineering getting harder, and it is getting harder. I would say the average campaign takes probably 3 days to put together. Custom infrastructure, if you're standing up, man the middle tools like Evil Jinx or stuff like that. That takes time to do end-to-end testing. And so the worst part about a social engineering campaign is that you spend 3 days coming up with a killer fish. You hit send, you send it to a perfectly tailored audience, and it gets reported. And that's always a difficult situation for a tester. And so like I said, we definitely do have some clients that's exactly what they want. And we do want to be proving out social engineering as best we can. And sometimes some clients are like, yeah, bring in physical social engineering as well, which we love doing. And physical, I would have to say, of the social engineerings today, physical is probably still the most successful. And so, that always opens up to fun debates, in terms of realism and things like that. Definitely not as realistic as, say, getting a phishing campaign, but wildly successful. But yeah,
we've seen a lot of success though too with like phone-based phishing. Like, hey, download this file and run it, which surprisingly you think either would be stopped with controls or wouldn't work. And even outside of phishing, we've been doing quite well with web apps and things like that. I think traditionally a lot of people scan web apps to, hey, see a login page and kind of keep moving. If we hit those with like previous breach credentials or even like sign up for an account on some of those custom things, like we've got access to companies like that before, pulling in people from our web app team to speed things up as well. So there's definitely things out there that are, interesting paths that I think, everybody leans towards just the email social engineering piece, but like we were doing SMS, phishing way before it was popular. And that was when we first started doing it was like a 98% success rate. It's a little less now because APT groups have been doing it, but still like there's, it's out there and it works.
It is out there and does work. So yeah, to bring that point back around, I tell my clients, if we're going to be doing things like assume breach or things like that, understand your threat model. And plan for it. We have assume breach scenarios to cover just about, I should say, most scenarios that might align with a threat model. And so know what you're after, and when it comes time to plan out an engagement, consider if you want to assume breach, the tester end at some point. And various organizations call this different. Some might call it white carding or things like that, where it's a seeded access model. But plan on that, because that way the flow from one phase to another is seamless and you're maximizing your value. And that's like one of the worst things you could do is not plan for that, and then you burn a week time waiting for the tester has to ship something really, really quickly, or ship you a device, or there's a whole lot of logistics that go into the C2 infrastructure and all that on the back end. And so having a plan in advance, really, really important part of making sure that the test goes smoothly and that the time is maximized, because we hate watching like dollars get burned in the form of wasted time. And it is very, very frustrating when we, send another follow-up email and another follow-up email, and there's no action because there's internal communication happening. And granted, some of the things are unavoidable. That's sometimes just the way it goes. But the material point here is plan in advance, understand your threat model, and plan for an assume breach scenario that corresponds to your threat model. Lots of value, extra value there.
And I have a really specific example of where planning helps a lot. So if you know that you're going to respond and remove access, having other assume breach scenarios set up in advance that are ready to go. And something we commonly run into, and this is probably a really universal ask, is, hey, we're going to ship you a laptop, or we're going to provide you a VDI. If you start going down that path of planning, a lot of times they'll ship you like a clean image, no email, no anything. And that's really unrealistic from a bookmark perspective and like chat history and things like that. So we've seen companies start to, when you start having this conversation, say, hey, we can provision you an employee who left their persona, or we will pick a random employee and run the payload on their computer. So when you start planning ahead of time for these things, you don't run into situations where, oh, hey, if you would have had the bookmarks that most users have, you would have known about these websites instead of finding out, 2 or 3 days into a test. So we like to talk about these things on the initial kickoff call and kind of as things go. If, hey, we're going to go to this assume breach model if we need to. If that fails, we have a backup plan already in place, and here's the list of requirements under those things. Just keeps things moving very smoothly.
Next one is understand that the tester is your ally, and so work with them. And what do I mean by this? It is okay, particularly on the kickoff call, like when setting objectives. I'll ask my clients. I'll just say outright, give me a DNS name, give me an IP range, give me an application name, anything to go on. Because typically when I first start the question of objectives, what comes back is invariably things like get domain admin, get PII, PHI, HIPAA data, PAN data, stuff like that. And I say, okay, that's great. How many hosts do you have in your environment? 25,000. Okay. And then I look at the calendar and I'm like, it's like 5 weeks to 6 weeks. I'm like, okay, it's okay to tell me application names, subnets, things like that. Because what you're doing is you're helping me manage my time best. And this gets back to part of the reason why you get a red team in the first place, is to actually see the attack paths that are going to take you from 0 to crown jewels. And so understanding where those things are, that's important. And I have no qualms whatsoever about asking that. And, clients or internal or things like that, if you're an internal red teamer, you already know where those things are. But from a consultant standpoint, I have no idea. And so I come right out and ask, be specific when it comes to objectives. And that, and then like, because I'll tell the client directly, this doesn't help me. Like, you're not giving me your, defender exclusion policy. It doesn't, that's not what I'm asking for. Just point me in the right direction and keep me going in the right direction, because what does that do? That maximizes value. And that's the whole point of being specific when it comes to things like objectives and hunting objectives and stuff like that, is we want to give you the best possible experience for the shortest amount of time. And so again, back to microwaving, there are certain things that it's okay to tell me in advance, because I'm not going to, I think the big fear sometimes is that clients will say, like, well, if I tell you this, then you're just gonna, abuse it. And, maybe there's this thought in the back of the mind, you're gonna abuse this and make me look bad in the report. No. That's not at all how this works. We love putting detections in the report wherever, if we get caught and you send us alerts, nice screenshot, we got caught here and here and here and here. And then, do some comparison. Like, this is normally where we see detections. You guys had detections that are above and beyond, or, a little below and subpar, and maybe here's some ways to improve. That's the whole point of doing the test. So understanding that the tester is your ally is a really, really good foundational mentality to bring to the test. And that, there's a flip side to that one that we'll get into, which can be malignant. But in this case, working with the tester, knowing the tester is not just like your friend, but like professionally there to help you get better. That's the whole point. And I've likened it to multiple times to a sparring partner. And so when you're sparring with someone, and you're the, like, you got a prize fighter, you are the person doing the sparring. Your entire job is to make them a better fighter. And so that means training at and slightly beyond their level, not training like massively beyond their level. And so, when it comes time for us, the red team, to spar with you, the blue team, the whole point is that we want to be competing right about at your level and slightly above your level to bring you up to that next point. And so working with us and understanding that your sparring partner is actually not just there to beat you up. That's a really, really important mentality to bring to the test. Justin, you got any comments on that?
Yeah, I would just add like one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is we get clients will when they come up with goals, they also show up with like CTI. They'll say, hey, like this is the CTI in the space that we're seeing. And we're worried about it. And then as we start to kind of iterate through the CTI, clients get coverage from their EDR and things like that might not be worth testing in that sort of capacity. So when we talk about the reveal and working with clients at the end of these things, if there's certain things we know will not get past a certain EDR, we'll generally avoid doing that and something we would hold back to the end. And that's kind of like working with the client to set reasonable goals and expectations around, what we're testing and going after. It's the same thing where, people see, hey, this group is out there, deploying ransomware in this sector, and, clients don't even have that technology in place. So we just do a lot of back and forth, like saying, hey, like this is our experience. Like, what is your experience with this? Just kind of working together on kind of those joint, what's a reasonable place to get to on this is just where we spend more time, I think, than we ever used to in the past. And that's kind of the knowing that you're the tester is your friend, right? Like, because we're relying on the client for some of their experience on really specific niche technology that's in the environment, but they're also relying on us because we see, tens of clients a year, and kind of learn from those experiences. So that goes back to the whole ally point. Like, we're there to bounce ideas off of each other. We're going to learn something from you. You're going to learn a lot from us. But we're trying to make the test the best it can be.
All right. Let's review top 5 ways to maximize value. Number 1, inform the right people that a test is occurring. Number 2, plan for detection and deconfliction. Number 3, schedule the reveal. Number 4, microwave where needed. And number 5, understand that the tester is your ally. Work with your tester. Those are the best ways that we can think of that will bring good value to the assessment, aside from just technical prowess and having a good report and being thorough in the walkthrough and stuff like that. Those are all things that we maybe take for granted at Trusted Sec. Maybe we shouldn't. But we do take for granted that the deliverables and the after action items and all those things are handled well and professionally. These are like extra things that just they really do make the assessment better. But there are a list of things that make an assessment worse. What do I mean by worse? Like I said, it kind of, there's a spidey sense that goes off after having done this as long as everybody on the team has done this. You get a sense that you're like, oh man, this is going to be difficult. There's going to be some moments, and I don't mean difficult technically. I mean difficult from the standpoint of everything is a fight, everything is a struggle. It's like, no, this really is important. Things to focus on, and so there's a list of things that can decrease value. I didn't quite prioritize the list other than the first one. The first one is the one that always is the most important factor in maintaining a good relationship professionally, as well as if there is one thing that I can count on, if there's an engagement that's going off the rails, it's 9 times out of 10, it's due to this one thing. And that one thing is expectation mismanagement. What is expectation mismanagement? It means not truly understanding what the client wants, or maybe the client hasn't communicated it fully, or the tester's thinking one thing, client's thinking something else, and we're like, hold on, guys, we need to have a moment where we take a stand, and this can go above to more than just like a status meeting, but there have been points where I'll give you a good example. I had a client sign up for a program to help build out a red team, an internal red team, which we do. We've done several of these engagements. And so the client's like, build us a red team and train our red team. And so we wrote up a statement, we started doing the work, and it became very obvious very quickly that, wait a second, maybe a red team isn't what you want. Maybe what we're looking at is more of, say, a penetration testing team, and then we're going to step into things like customized C2s and, you know, stuff like that, like evasive payloads. I mean, those are specialized disciplines within offensive security. And so what we did was we had a meeting that just said, hold on a second, let's, instead of like going down the full red team route, can we focus more on internal pen testing first, get that skill set up to where it needs to be, and then we can move in advanced topics? And the answer is like, yes. And if we had just pushed through with red team, well, it wouldn't have landed. The value wouldn't have been there during engagement. And so the opposite can also be true when expectations are laid forward or put forward in the statement of work, where we look at them and we're like, okay, it's going to be this, and then it turns out to be something else. And again, those moments where, and this is incumbent upon us, is to reiterate, and this is just good practice with people in general. Somebody says something to you, you repeat it back to them, make sure you understand it, and you know, as long as you are lockstep in terms of expectations, that's good to go. And by expectations, that also means things like tester's going to be out for a day, or you know, I've had clients where we moved to an assumed breach, and the person that I'm using as an assumed breach, like a trusted insider, they go on PTO for a week. Like, hey guys, I need a machine to be online, you know. And so like having those expectations, even if they might seem extremely basic, setting the expectations with good communication at the outset of the engagement, there is nothing that greases the gears, so to speak, more than making sure the expectations are in alignment, lockstep, and then in every subsequent status meeting, we're checking expectations. We're just taking the temperature. Is this what you're expecting? Yes, no, you know, and then like going from there and like tailoring the engagement so that we're not just like forcing a square peg into a round hole. We're making sure you get what you need as a client. And internal red teams, same thing applies. Exact same thing applies, because you might get a directive from your manager, your director, your CISO that's saying, hey, need this and this and this. And if you try and push it into a different model and you start working on a different model and you deliver something that wasn't asked for, you're going to be rightly asked, why did you do this? That's not what I asked for. And so understanding and repeating the expectations, I can't think of really anything that's more important than that from the outset of the engagement. So the last point that I'll make on that one, and then I'll turn over to Justin, is being realistic in terms of what you can do as a tester with the time you have. You know, if you got 3 weeks on assumed breach and the goal is like get into like an air gap system, probably not going to happen, right? So be realistic with what you can do, with what the attack surface is and what your capabilities are, and then inform the necessary parties. Hey, listen, I don't think that's enough time to do this, but it is enough time to do this and this and this. Because if you overpromise and underdeliver, that is a surefire way of making people mad at you. And that's not what you want. You want to promise and deliver exactly what you say you're going to do. And so, granted, a lot of that takes experience, but again, it's so much better to just read the room and say, I don't think that I can necessarily do that in this time, but I'm pretty sure I can do this and this and this. Is that sufficient? So promise, deliver, don't overpromise and underdeliver. Justin?
I'm going to jump to the next one just because we're going to need time for Q&A. So I'm going to keep things
sure.
moving. So this is a fun one, and I'm sure you'll jump in here too. So sort of sabotaging the process. So this doesn't happen as much as it used to happen, but it's definitely still a thing. So a really good example of this is a client wants daily status updates or status updates every other day or whatever, and they say, hey, we got into XYZ's account, or we tell them that, and then the next morning that person's password is reset. Cool. But it's something that derails the engagement itself. If there was a detection and something happened, you know, perfect. Or there's some really obscure use case, like if something happens to that person's account, like, you know, critical outage. But a lot of times it's just people kind of safeguarding what they think is, you know, preventing us from going to the next step. So that's one thing that kills a lot of these, is if people are on the update calls and then somehow interfering in the process. Probably, obviously, they're trying to keep things, you know, best for the company in that regards, or at least in their mind, but kind of breaking some of the steps that we get, because all it forces us to do is then find another user or start over down another attack path. A lot of times, if a client's going down that path, they say, hey, like, we want to switch this user out or whatever, or sorry, switch this user's password, they might put us down another path. There's a better way to go. Hey, we don't want you getting on this system because it's a production one, but there's a stage system over here. There's a similar system over here.
Yep.
That's where we try to push clients if they're going to intervene along the way and kind of push us in a different direction. Like I said, it's not as common these days. Another thing we see is, hey, we found this vulnerability in the system, and then magically the next day it's patched. And a lot of these companies are big companies where there's a whole change management process that they may have skipped as well. So, hey, if it happened organically, cool. But a lot of times it's just kind of people throwing themselves in the mix and saying, "How we realized you exploited this. We're going to go patch them all really quick." Again, to that point, nowadays, if a client wants to do that, and obviously if it's external facing, it's critical, we get that. We'd usually work with the client to say, hey, since you patch us, we can't get in, can you put us over here instead, and let us kind of continue the attack path and let it play out. So just that goes to say that I think people get a little overzealous to try to control some of the testing we do. We just like to see, if you're going to do that, at least give us some adjacent level access to keep things going, because a lot of times it's those secondary detections, something on an obscure system where maybe it's Linux or something like that, where your EDR is not as strong. Well, if we would have got on there and moved around a little bit, you would have been able to see, hey, we have all these gaps. Maybe we should do additional logging or something like that. I know Lang will have some more stuff to throw in on this one because it's always a fun one.
What? What do you mean? No, mum's word. No, I totally agree. In fact, on the kickoff call, I tell clients outright, please don't reset passwords in the middle of the test. I understand you want to, and I understand why you want to. It makes all the sense in the world. But back to the previous point, tester's your ally, right? I'm not here to make anybody look bad. This isn't, like an ego thing. This is me doing my best for you. And here's the thing: if let's say we get some elevated credential due to whatever, we find a plain text password, okay, and then I will tell the client outright. I'll say, listen, if you ask me, what creds am I using, and there's been no alert so far, I'll tell you. I'll of course tell you, it's your environment. But I'll also tell you, if you reset the password, you send me back, to square one. And if that's what you want, that's fine. If you would rather me prove out like a different style of attack path to get to that point that I was just at, that's fine. Just understand what the ramifications are, and the report has to reflect that. So I might not get to the goal in time. Again, expectation management, right? Making sure that it's well understood. If this, then that. And that's it, and that comes back to not over promising. And so, like I said, I tell clients, I know you want to fix things. I 100% understand. Wait until like the last day, and I will help you and tell you exactly what to fix, and the best ways of going about remediation and stuff like that. But let the test play out organically as much as possible. Your reasons for wanting to fix things, totally understand, and they are all good reasons. But we're your ally. Let us finish through the process. You will get better value if you let the test proceed out normally. So I do see question coming in. Most of the questions I say we'll get to the end, or we'll handle at the end. So yeah. So next one is going to be an adversarial, not just competitive attitude. And this goes both ways. This could be red team versus blue team. This could be provider versus client. This could be any way that there is a bit of competition. And I actually on a recent blog post I did about maximizing the value of your red team, somebody posted, like dissected the post and said this should never be competitive. And I disagree. It should be competitive. Red team versus blue team, sparring partner, there is inherently competition in that model, because you want your sparring partner to not just like stand there and be a punching bag, but to actively punch back. What is that? That is competition. And it's not about like, it's not the title fight. The title fight is you, the defense team, in the real world, right? But when we're sparring, there is an element of competition, and there should be, because that's fundamentally what this is about. It's fine as long as it doesn't turn adversarial, okay? Where now it's like, I don't like you, and now I'm either going to, as a defender, sabotage the test, or as a red teamer, I'm just all, it's like all just the ego show, and I'm just going to gloat in the report and make you, drag you through the mud. That's not at all what this is about. And so we go to very, very long lengths to make sure that the relationship stays professional, friendly and courteous and understanding. We're your ally. We're on the same team. Yes, there will be competition, but it's a competition designed to make you, the prize fighter, a better fighter in the real world. So
I just say we run into this less now. We run into that piece more with internal red teams where we have been doing red teaming for
yeah.
years. They then build their own internal red team. That internal red team wants to show value, crushes everything in its wake,
Mhm.
and then therefore upsets managers or different management chains and things like that. Usually at the point what we're in the consulting piece, this is less of an issue, but it definitely pops up with the places that we advise, or we work next to with their internal red teams. Um, the next one down is internal miscommunication. So this is expectation mismanagement. I think this crops up a lot of times where the person who does the purchasing at the company and sets up the whole engagement may not be the ground level people running the engagement from day to day and
Mhm.
may not have the same want the same outcome that the person who purchased the assessment would. And it could be things like not alignment on goals, um, not alignment on what the response is going to look like. And we try as much as we can to pull all those people together, but a lot of times the way these things play out from purchasing is, we might talk to a CISO up front or have several calls, plan the whole thing, goes to a purchasing department, and by the time it runs 6 months later, the director of infosec is the one who's picking up the project and running and with it. So we always like to try to reiterate goals, reiterate things from the initial conversations, try to sync up as much as possible. And that's just I think one of the traps you run into just because the buying process for these is pretty long. And in infosec, obviously a lot of things changes, right? Your priority 6 months ago might be different than now. With like MGM and things like that, issues with like help desk phone calls, right? We might have a plan with the client to say we're going to do email phishing. We go to do the assessment, like, oh well, voice phishing is all over the news and password resets via help desk are. So we go do that. The initial person buying it might have wanted to see the email phishing, things like that pop up. Lang, you might have some other good examples.
Yeah, on the internal miscommunication front. Now, you nailed it when it comes to um, internal teams not necessarily just communicating well. That's it. I have a classic example. One client asked me who they should talk to internally about the results of the test, and I was like, well, a good list of people might be, your SOC manager, your supervisor, and the question was, well, who are these people? Can you find out for me? I'm like, no, no, that's your job. That's on you. And that, like, I could see the communication chain break down immediately. And when that happens, it's always a disconcerting thing because another example, and this is actually, I'm probably gonna pinch a nerve with a lot of you. Red team therapy is a thing. What does red team therapy mean? It doesn't mean red teamers going to take therapy. It means my internal point of contact using me, an outsider, as their therapist, because things are bad internally. And I've worked with contacts that have, you know, complained and complained and complained about the company and then quit like 2 weeks later. And I'm like, okay, it can be, it's a little nerve wracking. Now, granted, life happens, right? That's just the way. Sometimes things go bad and they turn sour, and that's just the way things are, right? But watching it break down, like the whole point of this point was it decreases value, and it does. And so the best engagements went from a communication standpoint are when the main point of contact and all the way up the chain are lockstep. And what does that come back to? That comes back to managing expectations. The expectation has been set. Everybody knows what it is. There's a plan. Everybody's aware of the plan, and we're following and executing the plan. That is the right way of going about this. And so communication and expectations are just hand in glove. They're tied together, right at the hip. And when one breaks down, the other breaks down, the value of the engagement starts to go down. And you'll notice a theme with some of these things. Most of these things, increasing value, decreasing value, they're not really technical. Maybe they can be like sabotaging, like resetting passwords and stuff like that. But it's not typically if you go to a major boutique firm, like and you pay for a red team, and red teams cost money, right? So you pay good money for a red team. Chances are you're likely to get a qualified tester that is good technically. Chances are, okay. Now, so it's not even so much necessarily about the technical prowess of the test. Sometimes it is, right? If they, overpromise and then you get a junior tester, like that kind of thing. But if you work with a reputable company, you're likely to get a good qualified tester. The way to bring the most value and the way to remove the most value is all in the people side of things and the management of the relationship, typically when it comes to expectations and communication. And so once things are understood and everybody is well aware of what can be done in the time that has been purchased, and then everybody agrees on that, it is normally just smooth sailing off into the red team sunset. So that's how we like to phrase it. But like I said, you'll notice that the vast majority of these, they're not really technical in nature. They all revolve around people. And as testers, we can get so focused on the hacking side of things, which is so much fun, but it is admittedly far easier. Hacking is easier than dealing with people. It is. And that is where things break down. And that is why we need the most guardrails around it. So last thing is, and I kind of tack this on there. We don't see it too much anymore, but every now and then it still crops up, which is a compliance only mindset. Typically, if somebody buys a red team, at least in 2025, they typically want a certain thing out of that red team. It's not even so much about checking a box anymore as it used to be. It's definitely still a thing in the pen test world where we need to stay PCI compliant and things like that. I'm not talking about doing something for the sake of compliance. I'm talking about bringing a compliance only mindset to it, which is where, yeah, whatever. I mean, it doesn't even really matter at this point. We really are just checking a box. We really just need you to do this and that. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's fine. But it sends a signal that maybe this isn't really the assessment that you want, because typically in 2025, when people are buying red teams, they're buying because they want to get better. And so, Justin, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I have a side piece to this compliance part. So we do have clients that get red teams large financials that do red teams for compliance. They are well aware of the type of work we're doing, and they know how to frame it to auditors or third parties. I would just make sure that if you're like, hey, I know we used to do pen tests, we're trying to get into red teaming, and we're going to try to do this for compliance, you know what you're getting into, because understand that there's more and more regulations that are requiring red teaming. However, you also need to be at a certain maturity level to be able to explain and frame those results and not say, hey, like, we've failed this compliance thing. Like, the point of the red team ultimately is going to find something. And so just managing expectations around that, if you're going to use these things for compliance, it's something we run into a good bit. I'll grab this first one if you want. Yeah. All right. So the question was, we mentioned involving the SOC manager. The question is, many people work with third-party SOCs and do not fully trust their third-party SOC. How would you approach this? And I would say a lot of clients bring us in to test their third-party SOC. So in this specific example, we might not rope them in because people are kind of using it as a gauge and what the threshold is for their MDR provider to, one, detect something, and two, do something useful with it. I would say actually probably more often than not, part of this is gauging what that response looks like from the after hour SOC or whatever gap they might fill for the company. Jason, I think.
No, you're exactly right. And that was a good question. One that I hadn't thought of it. Yeah, a lot of times when we are testing third-party SOCs, no, we don't involve them, and the client doesn't necessarily involve them. Typically, at least in my experience, a third-party SOC doesn't really have the ability. Sometimes they do, but doesn't really have the ability to start taking down infrastructure. It's more of an alerting mechanism that says, hey, you've been hacked. Here's the information, go follow up on it. And so, if an alert comes in, we definitely want to see it, but one or two alerts from a SOC, a third-party SOC, that doesn't necessarily concern me. What really concerns me is when the internal SOC is like, hey, we're going to start rebooting all this stuff. And the truth is that most third-party SOCs, with the exception of a couple that I can think of, a couple of EDR firms that provide the value add of having a third party, like an XDR kind of thing. Most I'll call them mid-tier socks. We typically don't even know that they're there until the end of the test when the client's like, yeah, and our sock didn't say anything. We're like, you had a sock? And yeah, it's this company. We're like, oh, okay. Now we know. And so they end up we end up testing their third-party sock anyway. So
Yeah, we definitely have clients that bring us in specifically to test, they want to change MDR providers, or if they want to gauge if they're getting value, and they definitely have us come in and ramp noise up in a measured fashion to figure out what the threshold is.
yeah, yeah. I remember there was a lot of that after the CrowdStrike blue screen of death. So yeah, test this and test that, and we don't want them anymore. And so we're happy to do that kind of testing. So that was the only open question. We'll take another minute or two if you guys want to type out any other questions. Otherwise, we will end early. What is one question you wish a client would ask? Oh, shoot, that's a good one. There's one question you wish a client would ask you at the beginning of an engagement. Oh, dang, I've never been asked this question before. I got to take a second on that one. Man, you totally stumped me. Justin, help me while I think. Save me for myself.
I mean,
oh man,
yeah.
you stumped Justin too. David, I'm giving you an award. I
See, we have so much back and forth dialogue.
Yeah.
I don't ever run into situations where we wouldn't have something like it. It's usually like, hey, like I think a lot of times clients don't expect us to push back on like bad ideas.
Yeah.
And we get in that a lot with like, hey, we want you to do this. We want you to push code to production. And then we're like, okay, cool. Like, and then we start talking through the steps and we're like, does that a code comment? Is it this? Where does this go to production? Is this going to hit like millions of machines around the world? Things like that. So we do have a lot of back and forth. I don't think I've ever been like, especially if a client's not going to ask me something and I'm particularly worried about it, like, hey, you have an OT environment. Have you guys ever banged around in here before, or things like that? Like, I will push those questions on them because I would rather ask than have us, trip over our own feet or cause some sort of problem. So I don't get a lot of like, you get end up with that one, Jason?
Yeah, I think, and I'm gonna get a little meta on you here for a second, David, but I think if I had to give you an answer, the question would be, do you agree? And I should give you some context for that. We get paid as consultants. We bring all of this experience from all of these verticals. And our job is to bring that into the testing experience and give you, the client, the best experience possible. And we're typically free flowing with our opinions, because that's what we're being paid for, right? But some clients that I've worked with are extremely confident in the way that they think things ought to be done. And I don't necessarily just want to start, a major disagreement like on a call and just say, yeah, I know that's what you think, but think about this thing and think about that thing and think about that thing. And so the question, do you agree or can you think of something better? Put your tester on the spot and capitalize on all their knowledge. So I'm a huge fan of superlative questions. Superlative meaning, hey, tester, what's the top 3 vulnerabilities you see for clients in or for your customers in our vertical? So and force the tester to distill down all that experience. Because I find that when I ask someone a superlative question, a few things happen. Number one, it typically keeps the conversation short and on track, right? You don't leave too much wiggle room. But number two, superlative questions are a great way of forcing someone to distill their thinking into something that's relevant for you, as opposed to just way open-ended questions where sky's the limit. Like the question that you asked me was an open sky's the limit question. And so like I'm trying to distill it down, ironically, by giving you the answer that says, ask a superlative question, any superlative question. Give me the best, give me the most, give me the worst. What's the biggest failure? Those sorts of things. If you ask a tester, tell me the last 3 ways you got caught unexpectedly. you're forcing them to distill down that knowledge. So I hope that gives you something. And I love getting superlative questions as well, because you'll watch me sit back and think for like 2 or 3 minutes before coming back at you with a relevant answer, not just spitballing. So hopefully that gives you something. Great question. Great question. We got 2 minutes left. Any others? Waiting for David to sweep in, go for the jugular with another one. All right. I think that's about it. There will be a recap on this. We do post these out to YouTube. And then we're looking at possibly just throwing out a quick blog post with a bit of a summary, what these points are. And so look for that as well. That should hit the internet sometime in the next couple of days. And I think that's about all. Rosa, you want to, or Justin, you have any final thoughts? And you're muted.
I'm good.
All right, cool. Rosa, you want to close this out?
I'm good. Thanks everyone for coming.
Take care all.